This episode is sponsored by my online training portal, which is designed by me to help you become a building forensics badass. You can get free access right now at buildingperformanceworkshop.com. Enjoy. Welcome to the Building Performance Podcast from the Building Performance Workshop. I'm Corbett Lunsford, and today we're talking about trends in performance-based building and improvements with Richard Beyer, who is an affected consumer affected by spray foam. So, Richard, you have, first of all, thank you very much for being with us today.
Not a problem at all.
And you can tell I'm super excited to get into the questions here. You are affected by spray foam. Can you elaborate on what your experience with spray foam was?
I was personally affected when I hired a professional contractor to install spray foam in my family residence. And that was in 2010. In 1997, I was introduced to spray foam, probably one of the most notarized products, which is known as a water-blown product. Back in the day, was considered the cat's meow of all insulations that was going to take over the insulation market for the future. And in fact, it pretty much has taken a very good leap into that market. So in 2010, when we hired a company to install spray foam within our home, the product noticeably started to shrink up a little bit to where I could notice it. And when I went to the company and asked for an explanation, it was said that the foam naturally shrinks as it cures. So about several months into watching this foam, and the noise in the late hours of the evening, the cracking, exploding noises, which later I learned the product was shrinking and releasing itself from the building materials. So when the first crack appeared, I went to the installation company and requested that they look at the product, and that's when the nightmare began.
So we'll get further into the nightmare in a minute, but you, first of all, I love that you know all about this product because you have had to deal with it, not because you learned it as an academic study or because you were interested in selling it or something. So I feel like you have a very particular angle on how you understand this stuff. So as far as the water blown, we'll get back to that for a second. It seems like that would be attractive to people because it sounds so natural. Is that your understanding of it as well?
Without question, a lot of people are misled with the marketing that is used with most of these products. And I think even installers are misled when they walk into these products, as well as building contractors, because they really don't understand the chemistry that's involved in manufacturing polyurethane foam. And once they do put some thought into it, which would take an awful lot of hours to really understand, and even 5 years down the road, still learning the different chemical aspects, but I prefer to stay away from speaking chemistry since I'm not a chemist. But the product itself, all of them are pretty much equal on the A side of the component, which makes the foam to begin with, and the B side of the component causing the A side to react to create that explosive illusion of the product rising off of the wall per se, which a lot of people find that to be the most interesting aspect of the product.
And just speaking of the chemistry, there's also the bio-based, which I think people think is 100% soybeans or whatever it is that they're using. And in fact, all foam, you can't make foam without chemicals. Is that right?
All foam is chemicals. All foam is made from petrochemicals. And all foam does contain what everybody says it does not contain, and that is formaldehyde. It begins with formaldehyde. And my question has always been, how could they market the product and say it's formaldehyde-free when it was manufactured from formaldehyde?
And just to be clear, for any of the listeners who do already install spray foam or are, in a spray foam company, are you against spray foam lock, stock, and barrel, or do you believe that there is a place for spray foam?
I'm not against spray foam, and I think a lot of people have tried to interpret my writings on the internet, as well as my public speaking about it, as being anti-foam. In fact, I'm far from anti-foam. I think that the foam industry is more concerned with pushing millions or billions of gallons of these chemicals rather than paying attention to the safety aspect of the lack of training with the industry, the lack of knowledge that the consumers are offered, and the misleading marketing that puts the consumers in the same boat that I ended up in, as well as installers who invested a substantial amount of their lifelong earnings to jump into an industry that they find to be liquid gold.
Now, can you tell us more about what specifically happened in your house?
Well, I think my house may have been a little more unique than the vast majority of the failures that are out there, but I'm not sure to this date exactly how unique that may be, because that's been the verbiage that has been spelled off to me from people who actually work in the industry. Many people seem to think that the chemistry that was used in my own home may have been altered to outside the installation guideline barriers, meaning that there may have been some foreign chemistry introduced into it. We don't know that truth yet. And as I said to you before, we are in the middle of a federal court case with a couple different chemical manufacturers as well as the installer, who I prefer not to disclose at this time, primarily because it's in federal court to put the gag order on that aspect of it. But as far as what I hear as well from many other consumers aside from my own property, is that they have very similar symptoms to what I experienced. They have odors of what they describe as a fishy odor, a dusty chemical odor that really is difficult to describe. I've spoken to people where the odor is not present until it gets hot outside, and then the home is just overwhelmingly toxic with this off-gassing of some unidentifiable chemical. And the people who have had industry come in and evaluate their homes, they have a tendency to point the finger at their sofa that they lived with for how many years, I don't know. They'll point at the carpet. They never relay back to the product that's causing the odor that, in fact, the odor didn't exist until the foam was put in their home. And I've been in some of these homes, and as soon as you walk into the attic space, it's clear as day, it's the foam. But the industry, they prefer to fight chemistry with homeowners, and most homeowners, they'll give up. They won't pursue it to great lengths. And there are many homeowners who have moved out of their homes, and there are many that still live in their homes. And they're just dealing with it because they just can't afford to move out and pay a second mortgage or rent in lieu of a mortgage.
Yeah. One of the complainants in one of the suits that you have been involved in actually said that their home insurance would not cover the cost of the damage from the spray foam because it doesn't cost things that are caused during a home renovation or things caused by chemicals. So they're kind of screwed on both accounts in that case. Does that describe everyone's home insurance, whether or not we know it?
Well, it appears to be that way. It appears to be that the homeowner's insurance does not cover anybody for the toxicity that's released from the chemistry that makes up spray foam, from its raw form to its solid state form. So when there's off-gassing, there are exclusions that are in your insurance policy that exclude you from gas, pollution, contamination. They have all the verbiage in there to protect themselves. And in fact, many of the installers that are spraying foam are not properly insured either. And in fact, this was a topic many times on some of the blogs over the years, that the installers are more concerned with paying for the least expensive policy than the correct policy. And some say that there are proper insurance policies for installers, which would be contractors' pollution liability. But the Vermont Supreme Court made a ruling recently that said that the general contractor's policy in a particular insured's legal issue is responsible to pay for the damages caused by the spray foam. But not every state recognizes that, and I'm sure that that's going to go on appeal as well.
Interesting. Now, I think it's interesting that we're talking about this at this point because another topic of that's pretty popular right now is police brutality. And it seems
Yeah.
like a pretty good analogy that there are obviously good police officers and bad police officers, in the same way that even you yourself are saying that there are some good spray foam installers and good spray foam companies. But it seems like if the good people don't turn against the bad people along with all the rest of us, we have to assume that all of them are bad guys. So have you found any spray foam companies that have actually come out and said, you know what, Richard, you're right. There does need to be more training and licensing, and we are absolutely behind you, and we're going to help stand up and fight this fight?
In my particular circumstance, I call it, and this is not a religious comment by any means, but it's just kind of like a comment in passing, where certain companies will put on a facade and join all these organizations and groups when they find themselves in trouble. And they will promote themselves as going through the proper training. They're all for training. They think that we need to get the bad guys out of the industry. And in fact, they are the bad guy. And those are the ones that you got to be very careful about when you speak about this, because it's all a big facade for the vast majority of companies that jump into that bandwagon of training and, and I'm the best at this and look at me, I have all the OSHA paperwork in line, but then you drive around and you look at some of these people, and I'm not pointing out one specific company either, but you'll see them repeating the same incidents that I've been speaking about for a few years now. And they're not bashful about it either. And that's the amazing part that really disturbs me the most, really.
Too much money going around.
Well, I guess that's why it's notated as this product is liquid gold to many installers. Money is the driving factor. It's not safety. It's not consumer safety. And in fact, I was just at a home recently where the gentleman had foam put in his attic, and he had his AC unit and everything up there, and they never even put the fire coating over the foam.
So aside from insurance, the proper insurance policy, what other specific things are you an activist for? It sounds like training. Like, how much training does a spray foam installer need to really correctly understand the chemistry experiment that is every single spray foam job that he does?
Well, I think the main thing that needs to be clearly understood is the fact that it is the only built-in product that's manufactured inside of a home. You're going from an A-side chemical of multiple chemicals combined, which make up MDI, to the B-side, which is multiple chemicals to make up the activating side of it, which is where consumers are fooled and contractors are fooled. But I think that the training, essentially what you're looking at is you're taking young men and you're putting them into a $250,000 rig, and they're handling toxic chemicals, and you're expecting some of these gentlemen who have 2 to 3 days, maybe 5 days of training to perform in your home as a chemist. So if we look at how long it takes to get a PhD, or to have any form of degree where you can work at a pharmaceutical, essentially that's what you're dealing with here. And in fact, these gentlemen, most of them maybe don't even have a high school diploma, and you're expecting them to understand a material safety data sheet.
Interestingly, and whenever I consult my clients, I'm always trying to err on the side of safety. Like, maybe nothing will happen, but it definitely could. So it seems like, as far as the marketing goes, I recently was looking at a mattress that had foam in it, and they were marketing it as 100% natural. And of course, as you have already said, you cannot make foam without chemicals. So then they clarified, and they said, sorry, what we meant is we were rounding down. Here's all the testing that shows that actually this exceeds the air quality standards of all known standards, including the state of California and Green Guard, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like it's not about whether formaldehyde is always a bad thing, and whether spray foam is always a bad thing, but there's manageable levels of danger, because of course just breathing in and out kills you a little bit every day, right? So like, we're all dying all the time. So how much of a risk do you think this is for most companies if they were actually able to get the training and the licensing and insurance that you're talking about? Do you think that it would be able to be as widespread as it is right now?
Well, I think that we need to go back when you asked that question to the 1980s, when spray foam was not the topic at issue. Off-gassing from carpeting and mattresses was. And that is really where the green movement began, in my opinion, where people started focusing on those particular industries. And if you see how far that got, many of the lawyers and the complainers about the chemistry end, I think that we're looking at the same aspect here with spray polyurethane foam. I don't think that the government is going to really uh, regulate as much as we would like them to make it safer for everybody. It's really become more of a numbers game. It's about jobs. It's about profits, stakeholders, shareholders, Wall Street. They are the driving factor behind this chemistry because they are the investors. The consumers, they're in a different league because they're not going to read into the product no more than they do when they buy an automobile. So those are some of the things that get people into trouble is the industry points the finger at the consumer and says, well, you should have gotten educated. You should have known about these chemicals. Essentially, they're asking you to be a chemist. And in fact, people, when they hire an insulator, they're hiring them to come in to help them save money on fuel, insulate the house. And in fact, I think, as you know yourself, Corbett, it's becoming a very dangerous topic because the insulation, I think, has gone too far, even though it has good intentions to save people money on oil. Now we're dealing with indoor air quality, indoor environmental issues that are backfiring on the general public. And I think that most of the intentions by the building science industry are good to a certain degree, but I think that many of them are trying to reinvent the wheel and become the next Frank Lloyd Wright under their own name. But until we get some strong standards on measuring indoor air quality, finding these pollutants before they're put into people's homes, and if we have no choice but to use the pollutant, can we at least find a way to adsorb it or change its chemistry using some other form of natural mineral like they're using with the new VOC drywalls and the flooring that they're marketing that adsorbs or changes formaldehyde into a vapor, or I should say as a non-hazardous vapor. Those are the kind of things that I think we all need to pay closer attention to because these building practices are really designed for new construction. And we have millions and millions of old homes. So if we're going to use new building practices in old homes, then we really need to wake up as a building industry and find a better, safer solution and put restrictions on certain products and say, look, you can't go into an old house and fill it up with foam, and this is why. Or you can't go into a new home and put that product in, and this is why. Unfortunately, the science for all of this stuff is fairly new, and we are essentially the guinea pigs of society today, and other countries are watching our country as we poison our own people, and as sad as that may be, it is a reality.
About the federal court case that you're involved in, I know that you can't talk about some elements of it, but I wonder if you could tell us at least if this is a watershed case that's going to decide things for other states, or if you think that there will be other cases exactly like this replicated across the country in the next couple of years.
There are several cases, for that matter, throughout the country already in the courts. The chemical industries have been very diligent about keeping them quiet. There are many cases filed in local courts, which there's really no way to track a superior court filing. My case in particular was moved to the federal court. My understanding is the argument was they felt that I had this political tie to the local politicians, and they felt they would get an unfair ruling. In fact, putting it into federal court just gave the companies a little more of a gag order to keep me quiet. And that's really what they were looking for because I have been probably one of the most outspoken consumers in reference to the effects of the toxicity of the product, and that scares people.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, having the conversation, the fact that we're having this conversation now, I wish that that there were individuals, and I know that corporations are not individuals, but individual people that we can involve in this, because it seemed, even to me as somebody who's not in the spray foam industry, I read some of the stuff that you were saying and I thought, oh no, we should have no spray foam. or that's what Richard is saying. But really, what you're saying is let's be reasonable, and you can't put spray foam all over everything. That's ridiculous. You couldn't do that with anything. So, do you think that there is a light on the horizon that we might actually be having this conversation with the spray foam installers, and whether or not the corporations themselves get involved? But are there individuals that are going to be coming out and really helping to have this conversation?
Most likely not. Most likely not. The product, I mean, I think that people need to understand is, as with everything, there's going to be toxins, as you pointed out earlier in the conversation. We're not going to escape it. We live in a chemical society today. And as long as we have all these modern conveniences, people are very easy to persuade and cast the toxic element aside. I mean, without plastics, you wouldn't have a computer monitor. You wouldn't have iPhones. There's a lot of modern conveniences that we have that make our lives easier that are derived from plastics and petrochemical byproducts. And that it goes right down to shampoos and soaps. So I think that the real answer to the question should be that spray foam is not that general, providing that it is used properly and not wrapping an entire structure. Because with wrapping an entire structure with it, you need to understand ventilation. And that right there alone is a very complex situation for many. Even those that claim to be expert HVAC contractors are still trying to move that air around in every single corner of a building. I hope that answers that question. But on the other side of it, I don't see spray foam as the devil as people are making it out to be. My main issue with the spray foam industry is the lies and deception in its marketing, the minimal training that is offered to these installers, the fact that training is up to you whether you want to be trained and not something that the industry says you must be trained. So a voluntary basis of training is not good. It needs to be a mandatory baseline. There needs to be regulations for testing before and after an installation, before it becomes occupied by your dog, cat, or your mom or dad. There needs to be air quality standards established within reason, and I say that with great respect to the indoor air quality industry. But on the other side of it, I hope that they don't just make a mad rush and come up with some calculation just to shut people up. But I have, unfortunately, for everything I've seen in the chemical industry, that very well could happen, and then a lot of these cases you see in the courts will probably be dissolved based off of that. But you can't erase the fact that people have been affected. You can't erase the fact that the health effects that they had, in fact, were there. But the industry in general doses the poison, and that's the way people view it. And in fact, we don't know what that dose is. We know what the 8-hour worker's dose is before it becomes poison, but we don't know what that dose is for the housewife that never leaves the house, or the office worker that works from his home. We just don't know how much the body can take before its organs start breaking down due to spray foam that has not been installed correctly, or in that fact, for foam that has been installed correctly. So, and I think that the NIST program in Maryland is illustrating that, where you had perfect oversight by government officials, and 18 months into this computer-operated home, it's shown elevated levels of chlorinated tris, which is TCPP, which we know now to be a carcinogen. So what is the excuse the industry is going to use for that? But you don't read a lot about that on the internet, and they've had a way to keep that pretty quiet. So we have to understand who we're going up against, when we talk about these matters.
Interesting. Well, it sounds like we will unfortunately be finding out what happens to human bodies when they're exposed to this stuff. Richard, thank you so much for all you do to help with this issue, and thank you very much for talking with us today.
Oh, not a problem at all. Thanks for having me, Corbin.
Richard Beyer is smarter than your average consumer. He was affected by spray foam insulation and now speaks out against the wrong use of it. You have been listening to the Building Performance Podcast. I'm Corbett Lunsford. Tune in next time.